the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. President of the African Export-Import Bank, Afrexim, Professor Benedict Oke-Orama. Director General of the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, Dr. Sidi Ould Tah. Koen Duns, Deputy Director General of the European Commission. Giles Carbonier, Vice President, International Committee of the Red Cross. And the roar. Founder, the Tony Elumelu Foundation, Tony O. Elumelu, C.O.M. Well, not just for Tony, but for all of them, let's put our hands together. Thank you. Over to you, Farid. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are this enthusiastic about a panel discussion, what does it look like when you do a football game? We are delighted to be here with you. We are delighted to have this opportunity. And we are going to get started because we don't have a lot of time. I would only ask all the panelists to keep in mind the audience they have, and the energy and enthusiasm of the audience. And I would ask you all to speak directly and from the heart. Take all the cliches and talking points that you were given by your staff and throw them away. And let's have some truthful discussion, frank, honest, and from the heart. So let me begin by asking Mr. Adesina of the African Development Bank. There's a simple question that I think everyone asks when they look at Africa. Why is there not more development, more growth, more entrepreneurs? What can be done to change that? What is the honest answer? You know, as a doctor almost, diagnose the problem and give us the cure.
Well, thank you very much, Farid. It's great to have you in Nigeria. And let me use the opportunity to also thank my dear brother, Tony Elumelu. He's done a fantastic job to put all this together. He has faith and confidence in the youth of Africa. And that's fantastic. Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President, it's good to see you, sir. And all the Excellencies, Mr. President of Senegal, President of DRC, Prime Minister of Uganda, Your Excellency, the First Ladies, please welcome. And Mrs. Olumelu also, please, thank you. Africa. No, Africa is not arising, it's already risen. And the reason for that is that even when, let's talk economics for a moment. If you look at the economic growth rates of Africa to date, Farid, this year, we project that the economies will grow, GDP growth rate will be 4%. Next year, 4.1%. But that doesn't tell you the story and the excitement of this continent. You have 22 countries that are growing at well over 5%. You've got 21 countries that are growing at 3 to 5%. Now, I know many of you will swim. If your head is above the water, global average, GDP growth rate is 3.2%. That means Africa is actually doing well and Africa is resilient. But however, I must be very quick to mention that GDP growth rate is important, but nobody eats GDP. GDP itself doesn't really create jobs. The challenge that we have, the honest challenge we have as we sit here, is a very humbling one. That we have 678 million young people that actually are there in Africa today. 12 to 13 million people enter the labor market every year. They can't find jobs. Only 3 million of them can find jobs. And so when we talk about growth, the growth has to be a growth that creates jobs. And I don't mean any kind of jobs. I mean quality jobs to have a decent living. And so what we've got to really do, in my view, is to look at the young people of our continent that are going to grow to about 840 million people by 2050, or 1 billion people by 2063. We can't keep postponing their future into the future. We have to help them today. The young people are not liabilities, they are assets. And when you go into a bank as a young person, you enter right there, nobody sees assets. Everybody sees risk, risk, and risk. Well, as president of African Development Bank, this is the point I want to make, is that we must begin to put our capital at risk for the young people of Africa. Fundamental. Now, we have so many presidents here today, and Excellency Mr. Vice President is here today. Why do we have this problem? A growth process that doesn't generate jobs. That's because we have missing institutions that are going to take care of all these 680 million people. We have market failure. The current market system doesn't provide financing to them. And you have governments that are not playing their role enough. And that's why we are producing so many people that are just jobless. Poverty is not an asset. I mean, I've been going around, I'm looking for how to create comparative advantage. I'm still looking for how poverty can be a comparative advantage. It's not. And so what we have to do, therefore, Tony is doing a fantastic job, and I think we should clap for him again. However, it's more than Tony. It's more than each one of us. What I want to propose today is this, that it's time for African leaders, African governments, to begin to shift from youth empowerment to youth investment. And in trying to do that, we have to correct Farid for those three fundamental failures: the missing institutions, the market failures, and the government failure. To do that, I propose that it's time that we begin to set up youth entrepreneurship and investment banks. Let me explain myself so that I'm very clear. A bank where you work, or banks where you walk into and they see assets, they don't see liability. Where you walk into, they have faith and confidence in young people who can actually help you to grow UBA and others, grow your business. What does this mean? That means that we have to de-risk lending to businesses of young people. I like the CEO of Tuli Olumelu Foundation. She was talking about $5 billion. What is $5 billion? $5 billion, create 1 million entrepreneurs, create 20 million jobs. It is time, I believe, Your Excellencies, and I want to congratulate you for all your magnific work, or magnific, that's French, a fantastic work that you are doing. I think it's time for us to create banks that are youth entrepreneurship and investment banks for Africa. When we do that, finally, Africa will fly and fly high, because the youth that I see in front of me in your various countries, they are not just the future of Africa, they are the present, and we have to start investing in them from today.
Let me ask Dr. Tao of the Arab Bank for Economic Development. You invest, in a sense, in this continent in the way that, that Mr. Adesina was just asking. What is the most successful strategy? Where do you find the opportunities? What do you think is succeeding in Africa, especially with regard to youth entrepreneurship?
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to present my congratulations for Mr. Tony Emelulu for this excellent initiative, and to express my deepest regard to Their Excellencies the Head of States and Governments, the First Ladies, and all the audience. And I would like to speak to the youth of Africa. BADEA, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, has been mainly dealing with public sector over the past 4 decades, providing financing for development projects and mainly in infrastructure. But today, we have just launched our 2030 strategy, which will focus on youth and women empowerment. How can we do that? We will not do it alone. We need partnership. And this is why I was happy to accept the invitation of Tony to attend this forum. It's all about partnership. No institution, no country can alone have a success in fighting poverty, in empowering youth and women, but it is all about partnership. This is why we would like to partner with government. Without government, nothing can be done. We are already partnered with African Development Bank, Afrexim Bank, but we'll do much with UN institution, with the foundation, and we are already in discussion with Tony Emelulu Foundation to have a partnership to empower youth across Africa. How have BADEA so far worked with youth and women in Africa? We have the most successful investment we made so far was in microfinance, and we have to acknowledge that. Microfinance, financial inclusion were the main driver for BADEA's success across Africa. But we need more than just providing finance. Access to finance is certainly a big issue, not only for SMEs, but also for youth entrepreneur, technopreneur, agripreneur, even sociopreneur. So we need also to develop capacity building. And this is why a cross-cutting pillar of our new strategy is capacity building. We have been working with ACBF, African Capacity Building Foundation, to develop women entrepreneurship capacities in many African countries, and we are ready to scale up this intervention in terms of providing capacity building in partnership with relevant institutions in Africa. So our vision for youth and women in Africa is, and for entrepreneurship, is to scale up our intervention, to rely on a partnership with all stakeholders, and to provide more resources for entrepreneurship. So far, we have been working with SMEs through line of financing to banks, and we are also in the process of creating a new financial institution to cater for the needs of those who don't have access to the formal banking system. And we do believe that there is a niche, a market niche, not only for the banks, but also for all the FIs, to provide resources for those who cannot access the formal banking system. So we rely on partnership, and we are here to work with all the youth organizations, with all the civil society foundation, and with the private sector, of course, and the government. Thank you.
Let me ask about a different kind of partnership, and let me ask the gentleman from Europe, Kern Downs of the European Commission. We know that Europeans are now very worried about immigration and migration, and they are taking many efforts to stop it or regulate it or control it. But is there an understanding in Europe that the fundamental solution to this problem is to help Africa develop so that you do not have as much of a pressure to migrate, And if that is the case, what kind of ambitious partnership can Europe offer to Africa?
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks, Tony, for inviting me over here. And let me start where Farid started, migration. The big advantage we've had with migration is somehow that it has put Africa much bigger on Europe's radar screen than ever before. Because somehow, thanks to migration, Europeans have started to understand that what happens in Africa doesn't stay in Africa. And that the future of Africa immediately affects the future of Europe. That's a first change. Now, we are very keen, and I think this process has started, to look beyond that. Now that Africa has captured the attention, we want to show that behind the immediacy of migration, there is a continent that is really booming. And I think that what we are seeing here today, all the dynamism, the power, the energy of African entrepreneurs, and what we see here today is just the tip of the iceberg. We see it all over the place, in plenty of countries, how young Africans, middle-aged Africans, have an entrepreneurial spirit, an entrepreneurial skill. Now, if I look at Europe, 99% of Europe's companies are small and medium-sized enterprises. 85% of the jobs created over the past 5 years in Europe have been created by small and medium-sized enterprises. There is no reason why African entrepreneurs cannot do exactly the same in Africa. And that's where we want to move now in Europe, which is we want to support this enormous potential of African entrepreneurship with our expertise, with our means. And the starting point for that is, of course, a shift of mindset in Europe. If I look at what President Juncker, the European Commission President, has said last year in his State of the Union, he made a proposal for a new Africa-Europe alliance on investment and jobs. And that's what we are now developing. We are looking at how we can use our means to support Africa in terms of developing and attracting, making more easy investments, public investments, private investments. We are heavily going to invest in skills, in vocational and educational training, because when jobs are created, you also need the people who are capable of taking those jobs. We are actively, and Tony knows it, looking into partnering with a sizable amount of money. Commissioner Mimica, the Development Commissioner, is absolutely keen on getting that done, partnering with the Tony Elumelu Foundation to basically provide funding so that he can scale up his business and provide and train entrepreneurs. The third field of action is markets. Entrepreneurs need markets, and we all know that market building, national market building, regional market building, and continental market building is absolutely something that Africa needs and that Africa wants to do. So we are partnering with the African Union Commission and with most of the African member states to make the continental African free trade area a reality. We have in Europe a lot of expertise to offer. It took us 30 years before we got what was in the Treaty of Rome, the single market, to get that under Jacques Delors lifted. We have some expertise to offer on how to do that, on the hard work that it takes, the studies. And that's maybe my final point, which is, and here we really want to partner with Africa, which is that it is important to set strategic goals, to agree on strategic guidelines. But the hard work requires in-depth analysis. It requires studies. It requires work at a level like what Tony Elumelu Foundation is doing with sets of entrepreneurs to monitor, to mentor, and to support them. That is clearly where Europe is moving. The timing for this move, it has started, as I've said, but the time is perfect. We are now entering into a new political cycle in Europe with a new European Commission, with a new multi-annual budget, which we will start the program. And so the setting is right now to shift the way in which we partner with Africa, to make it more a real partnership of equals, where we focus less on Africa's problems and much more on supporting Africa's solutions.
Monsieur Carbonnier from the Red Cross, you have already partnered with the TEF And I think it would be useful to get some sense of what are the lessons you have drawn, what are the successes, what are the areas where these kind of partnerships work best.
Thank you, Farid. Excellencies, heads of states, first ladies, distinguished guests, dear African young entrepreneurs and friends. Indeed, we are extremely proud to have pioneered a partnership with the Tony Elumelu Foundation to jointly invest in youth, as was suggested. And we do that because we are working with about half of our staff, energy, and commitments in Africa. And while we are working with communities, with people affected by sometimes protracted crises, by waves of violence and conflict, we listen to them. And what the communities say to us is, we don't want to live on hands out. We are glad to get, in a crisis moment, some life-saving support, but we want to take our destiny in our own hands. We want to regain also a dignified way of life. And actually, we discovered that they have not only plenty of agency, but also a lot of initiatives that would provide solutions that we cannot provide. So we have been extremely glad and happy to be able to start doing so in Nigeria first, in Borno State and elsewhere, investing not only in concrete business plans with young African entrepreneurs, but also investing in training, in equipping them with the necessary knowledge. And I think that this is absolutely critical for development, because very recently I was at a development finance institutions gathering where all these development finance institutions were saying, why can't we invest more in fragile contexts, in difficult contexts, where institutions are weak? And the main issue that came out is that it is not the lack of capital. Sometimes they have an excess of liquidity, but it is the difficulty to find bankable projects with entrepreneurs with a certain track record that have the financial literacy and also the capacity to present solid business plans. So again, thank you to Tony Elumelu and the Foundation. We're extremely glad to continue and build on these initial successes. And I think that another manner to really try to find innovative solutions is what you have mentioned as partnerships. We have started to partner in the framework of new financial models to bring the expertise and the resources of different actors to be able to find solutions to maintain critical infrastructure and to provide livelihood and livelihood means and capacities to people affected by violence and conflict. And one example I want to give you is that we have launched 2 years ago the first humanitarian impact bond. And this impact bond brings investors who invested in projects where we build physical rehabilitation centers in Mopti, Mali, but also in Kinshasa, the DRC, and in Maiduguri, in this country, Nigeria. And investors are taking the risks, and outcome funders, mainly states, are ready to pay back if we achieve our stated objectives, including in terms of training the personnel to really run this properly. And I'm glad to announce that we are considering 2 more humanitarian impact bonds for next year. One to provide access to education in South Sudan, especially in zones that are under the control of the opposition, and the other one to provide an extension to a water provision service and water board in partnership with the Goma water board in the DRC. So I think that by bringing these new financial models, we not only bring new resources, but also the skills and the know-how of different stakeholders in partnerships. And to conclude, I just want to follow on your invitation to speak from the heart. I've been, over the past 15 years, a development economist and having a lot of students from Africa, conducting research with African partners in different universities in Africa. And I think that what we witnessed yesterday, today, is extremely rejoicing in terms of having the dynamism and this willingness to invest in African-capitalism, in finding African solutions to African issues. And I'm very glad to be able to participate in this endeavor.
Amen. Let me ask Professor Orama of the African Export Bank, Export-Import Bank, about a different kind of partnership and cooperation which is among the nations of Africa. I remember when I was running Newsweek magazine, we would find it difficult to position our Africa correspondent somewhere in Africa because there were so few flights between African countries that it was actually easier to put the person in London or Paris. They could reach more of Africa by being in London than by being in Africa. And that is, in a sense, a metaphor for the lack of cooperation and the lack of inter-African dialogue, trade, communication. Is that going to change? Because in order to build genuine entrepreneurship, you need scale. You need an African-wide market. You need an African-wide society almost. And are we approaching that?
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, Heads of State, First Ladies, senior officials of the Nigerian government, Vice President, Your Excellencies, heads of international organizations, governors, the youth. I'll speak from my heart, as you suggested. Before talking about the kinds of partnerships we have and what they portend for the future about integrating the continent, let me first say to you that a lot has happened with the Continental Free Trade Agreement having been signed and having come into force, the single air transport market having been signed by quite a number of African countries. But let me go to entrepreneurship and how all those connect. You know, we talk a lot about we have to invest in infrastructure, we have to invest in this, we invest in this, and that will create entrepreneurs. And those entrepreneurs will then change Africa. I think these are important, but I think we're missing one thing. That one thing is our people. Because if you look at the world today, there are developing countries where they have built the infrastructure, where they have a lot of money. But look at their development indices today and compare it to the indices in South Korea, Japan, and others. And you see they are very, very far away. And then you ask yourself, is it infrastructure? Is infrastructure the problem? If it is, those countries will have been somewhere else. I think it is our people. We have to reorient our people to be daring, to take risks. We can talk about policies that will make people to take risks. But in this world we are in, where the global competition is intense, if we don't take our future in our own hands and dare, we are not going to take advantage of the opportunities that exist in Africa. 60 years ago, many African countries did not have independence. Many of the youth here will go back to their countries, and there are so many places they will not be able to go to because of the situation. For South Africa, just 30 years ago. Today, they can go everywhere. So our leaders have done a lot. But our youth and all of us, the officials and all that, we forget that we've won a political battle. But we are now in the midst of an epic economic struggle. And that political battle was won, not because our fathers and forefathers were talking of work-life balance in their offices. It's not where they work 5 hours or 7 hours in the offices. Because they were in the bush fighting as guerrillas. They didn't talk about work-life balance. Today, the soldiers in the economic battle are the youth. The war, the training grounds will not be in the training camps, they are in the universities. The innovation hubs will be where our soldiers will be trained. And we ask ourselves, how many of the people, the youth here, will give everything, spend hours, as the Japanese did, as the Chinese did, and are still doing, to be able to create wealth for themselves, knowing that when they do that, they will create wealth for everybody. And that brings me to my suggestion to the Tony Elumelu Foundation. And when you do the selection, maybe one criterion should be the passion, the orientation of the people you select. So that it's not just the proposal they give to you. Because you can give the best proposals, but if you do not have the daring, as you did, Tony, to become rich, they will not create the kinds of jobs we are looking for. So, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the markets will become greater. We need to create access to these markets. We need to provide more information about what is happening across Africa so that our youth, our entrepreneurs, our businesses will know where the opportunities exist, how to evaluate risks, and how to take those risks. We need, as governments now, to provide the kinds of interventions that will make people to take risks. Because it is those interventions that will give the entrepreneurs the confidence to take the risk. If we don't have venture capital funds, for example, just something similar to what Tony is doing in a different way. You can talk about you can make all the investments you want to make in infrastructure. You're not going to create any wealth. So, as I look at the youth here, I thank Tony for bringing them so we can all share our views from our heart. And I hope they can all live here knowing today that what they are engaging is beyond themselves. It is in a struggle to get Africa to rise so that we will no longer be seen as the scums of the earth again. Thank you.
Let me ask the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, to talk about a sometimes forgotten dimension of African growth. Dr. Tedros has experience, because as Foreign Minister of Ethiopia, you were instrumental in coming up with a number of very innovative healthcare schemes. There are some calculations that say there is a $60 to $70 billion gap in spending on healthcare in Africa that needs to be done. Now, what that says to me is this is not going to be done by governments, that there is a role for the private sector, and that means a role for entrepreneurs. Tell us a little bit about the healthcare environment and to what extent are there opportunities here for entrepreneurs and for private business?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, Heads of State, Heads of Government, Your Excellencies, First Ladies, Excellencies, friends and colleagues. First of all, I was here yesterday and I used the opportunity, so I spoke a lot. And today with all colleagues here, I have another opportunity. so I'll try to be brief because I have said many of the things yesterday. I would start with the opportunities that the continent itself is creating. One is, as has already been said, last July, the free trade agreement was already finalized, so all countries are in. And this means the entrepreneurs have now a big market, the biggest market on earth, actually. And that includes the health sector itself. I think this is a very good news for this generation, bringing Africa together. And then the second milestone this year is last February, there was a resolution by the heads of states during the Africa Union Summit in Addis, calling for focus on universal health coverage, calling for increased domestic resource mobilization. And as you know, domestic resource mobilization means opportunities for investment and for private sector, and also stressing the importance of working with the private sector. So that resolution, I think this year was key. So two important things. And the third is many countries are now trying to do improving their business environment of doing business, and that's very important. And not only for the other sectors, this will be important for the health sector too. And the other good thing is many countries are now identifying and having public policy to encourage the private sector, especially in three areas. One is not only in the services, which is the traditional one, but in the manufacturing industry, including especially focus on small and medium enterprises. But not only that, in medical education too, services, medical education, and manufacturing. So I think seeing the investment in the health sector as part of the overall investment and giving it attention specifically, like what the AU Summit did in February, is very crucial. But going back to what I said earlier, Dio, the master of ceremony, was asking the entrepreneurs where they are from. And I couldn't hear what they were saying, so I asked someone next to me yesterday, what's the answer? And they told me each person mentions its own country. Then that reminded me what President Museveni said some time ago, a few years ago. I think the answer could have been Africa. Because of the origin of humanity from Africa, President Museveni says the type of people we have on earth are actually two types, Africans and ex-Africans. Because the origin of humanity is Africa, and which is true. But the reason I'm raising this is because of the free trade agreement, the whole field of Africa is now for entrepreneurs from Africa to really play their part and increase the intra-Africa trade to the maximum. You know, the intra-trade in Africa is not more than 11%, maximum 12, 13%. Which is not going to help for growth in Africa. Then the last part, the final, investing in youth is a smart investment. But not only a smart investment, it's a must. Because, especially in Africa, the majority is young. If you play it well, if you invest in the youth, there would be demographic dividend, which can ensure prosperity in Africa. If there is no investment in the youth, the alternative will be not demographic dividend, but demographic bomb, and stabilizes many countries. So that's why it's not only a smart investment in youth, it's also a must. But we should do it for the sake of prosperity. But if we don't, there are repercussions because of high unemployment, which can end up destabilizing countries. And the health sector in here should be taken as one of the important investments, because there are millions of gaps that should be filled and that can help in the prosperity of countries. Thank you so much again.
Those are fascinating comments, and I particularly like your characterization of the people of the world. I did a special report on white supremacy, and I wish I had known that phrase. I would have mentioned to the white supremacists I interviewed that they were actually all ex-Africans. I think that would have horrified them, but it would have made the point very well. Tony, when you listen to all this, you are looking at it now from the point of view of entrepreneurship. Welcome, President Kagame. Tony, when you look at all this and you hear this conversation, and you are thinking about the role of entrepreneurs and of small and medium enterprises, so-called SMEs, what is your reaction to the conversation you've heard, looking at it almost as you are now the excellency ambassador for all African entrepreneurs? What does it look like to you?
I'm happy that there's a near convergence, or a firm one actually, that in the 21st century, the development of Africa first lies in our hands. Two, that entrepreneurship is a way to sustainable development. Three, that self-reliance is key and what we all should seek to achieve when we are given. I like the fact that we have today in audience presidents of African countries who are committed equally to the development of our young ones, who have realized that as we prioritize our young ones, we actually prioritize the development of the continent. That is fantastic. I'm happy also that we have here international agencies, European Commission, Red Cross, and the World Health Organization, and of course regional institutions. And I like the question about intra-African movement and transportation. Maybe Dr. Adesina and Professor Orama, and also my friend Tawa would maybe touch that again, because transportation is key for the development of our continent. And what you said is so right about the way we move. To go to the neighboring country, you might have to fly to Paris and come back, or go to South Africa and come back. We need to fix this for development. But let me say that to young African entrepreneurs, the stage is now yours to take and actualize your dreams and aspirations. What we do at the Tony Elumelu Foundation is just to create this kind of platform for all of you, give you the opportunity to interact with our leaders, and give you little seed capital to help you prove your ideas, so that people, our young ones, don't go to the grave with their ideas. We want to see you succeed. And I'm happy that everyone is on board about prioritizing you, about supporting you, about providing extra capacity to enable you become, indeed, our true future leaders. I like what the European Commission just said, and I don't know if you all listened, because I thought we were going to clap heavily for him. But he said this is the beginning of a new political cycle, and that a lot will be done to support African entrepreneurs in partnership with the Tony Elumelu Foundation and other institutions. That is great, and we would like to see more. I think yesterday an announcement was made by the APC. Maybe they said even APC, this Asia Pacific Caribbean platform, wanted to support additional 2,000 African entrepreneurs through the Tony Elumelu Foundation. We want to see more of this. So I'm happy the African Development Bank this year supported 1,000 young African entrepreneurs. So I'd like you all to join me clapping. The Afrexim, our Export-Import Bank, is also positioning to support, has signed our agreement with the Tony Melu Foundation to support, to help scale up the entrepreneurs who are supporting. And hopefully we would like them too to support more, to provide seed capital so that we can have more of you benefit from this program, because it's important to have the opportunity to prove your concept, your ideas. And that is why this kind of $5,000 is so important. Then we can scale that up. But if we don't give you the opportunity to prove your idea, you don't have the opportunity to scale up. And so we appreciate what Afrexim is doing, and we would like them to do more to support young Africans. And the International Red Cross is wonderful, as I said yesterday. They were the first international partners we had, and they supported 200 entrepreneurs from the Niger Delta and the northeastern part of Nigeria, and now they're ready to do even more in fragile economies. To us, this is the changing narrative, and this is the changing mindset we like international development institutions to have. That the way to intervene and support Africa in the 21st century must change. You should support from the point of view of helping Africans to become self-reliant. You know, Red Cross, some of us grew up seeing, understanding Red Cross as that institution that helps when there's crisis. But now, proactively, they want to stop. We need to prevent. We don't want to have crisis there moving. Let's empower young ones so that there will be less crisis. So I like this new mindset, and we need to do more. So thank you very much. And we're lucky to have Dons here, who is the Deputy Head of the European Commission, and hopefully greater announcements and other things will come soon. And for him to make the commitment he's making here, I think we can have it better. So we would like to work with you, the Tony Melu Foundation, other institutions, so that we can help uplift our people out of poverty. And I like what you said, to amplify it, that in Europe today, maybe there's a blessing about the migrant crisis, that people now know that what happens in Africa doesn't stay in Africa. What happens in Africa can happen in other places. And that's why I say that poverty anywhere is a threat to all of us everywhere. So the more we come together to provide solutions, create prosperity, make sure our young ones are engaged, the better for the world. So thanks so much, and we look forward to doing great things under your leadership. Congrats. Under your leadership. And my brother, we like to work together, to scale up, but more importantly, to be nice, your institution, Afrexim, ADB, and other African institutions, international like United Bank for Africa and the likes, to come together and see how we can improve intra-African movement. Because we all talk about the fact that one of the reasons intra-African trade is low is that the infrastructure we had were colonial infrastructure, like roads, rails, etc. In the 21st century, we need to now use the platforms that you all have to attract global capital into Africa, to develop new and modern infrastructure that will help us to truly uplift Africa. So it's challenge 2.0 for you all. And to our brother World Health Organization, thanks so much for all the support. You know, we all know that a healthy world is one that will breed and support prosperity. So we're happy that our own is the president of the World Health Organization, and we would like to work with you to encourage especially young Africans who are interested in the health sector. So many ways we can encourage them, not just capital alone, skill development, exposure, platform, networking opportunities, research, sharing research materials with them, so that collectively we all lift the continent out of poverty. I want to thank our presidents for your wonderful support. Some of you were not here when Dr. Additional spoke. But I think we'll paraphrase, we'll just summarize that, and we have a lot to do to make sure that collectively we lift Africa out of poverty. Thank you.
Let me close where Mr. Adesina began, which is with the hopeful note that there is much happening in Africa. There is growth. But it is with the same cautionary tale that you told. Firstly, some of this growth is happening from a very low base. So when you are at $300-400 per capita GDP, if you're growing even at 5%, you need to sustain that for a long period. And that growth must be inclusive. Unemployment must keep coming down. And in order to do that, as you described, there are these three failures. And I would just say that maybe what we have to focus on is that there is this extraordinary energy and enthusiasm represented by the TEF entrepreneurs, represented by the youth of Africa. I would love to see the same energy and dynamism in the governments of Africa to open up the system for these people. And that seems to me the perfect transition to move from our panel of experts and NGO heads and the like to the next panel, which is in fact all the leaders of government. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we will move directly to the President's panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm certain that you can do much better. Please, let's appreciate, applaud. It's about a perfect transition, and the power is the empowerment of African youth in global entrepreneurship. We've heard it from the EU, we've heard it from the African Development Bank. It's an initiative that takes the youth as well as a partnership with African youth to a place of distinctive and innovative change. The Tony Elumelu Foundation, in doing the assessments of the various entries for the youth requirements that come in for this project, looks for three things. Whatever your idea and plan is, it must first of all be feasible, secondly scalable, and most importantly innovative. Yes, Fareed Zakaria with us. Here is GPS, and he has stated it once again. There is much happening in Africa. There is growth. But as he put it succinctly, there is caution. We caution knowing that in making this election and the very definitive choices of empowering Africa, we establish not just in verb, but more importantly, in active verse. Every idea whose time is now. Fareed, just a moment. Talking about you as a youth in your time, what would you say was your most challenging idea that you wanted to bring to birth, to pass, and sitting before the African youth today? What could you tell us?
Well, I grew up in India, a country that at the time when I was growing up was very poor, and there were not a lot of opportunities for young people, which is one of the reasons why so many people in India ended up in Britain and America. And so I think the biggest message I would say is that when people worry about brain drain, the thing to remember is you still have lots of talented people in your country. The great tragedy in your countries is not that a few thousand people or even a few tens of thousands of people move to the West. The great tragedy is that the millions of people who are equally talented, equally bright, equally hardworking, do not have opportunities in your own countries. I think we need to change the signs here so that the heads of state and government will know where to sit in order to move on to the next session. If we can get some of the conference organizers to the names to change as well.
Carpe diem, there's no time like the present. I'd like to say something. In the place of your personal story, what you just shared with us about India, and you coming out yesterday, a lot of the conversation centered around the fact that you failed to go forward. And failure is just a power start for a new beginning. Where did Fareed Zakaria fail that today he's become such an iconic reference in media and of course in global conversations?
One fails all the time. I mean, you fail because you have set yourself a goal that you're not always able to fulfill. I feel as though I fail every every month, I set myself goals that are perhaps a little too ambitious, both professionally and personally. I set myself goals when I work out in terms of running and things like that. But if you don't set yourself a goal, you won't achieve what you need to achieve, it becomes difficult to organize yourself and organize your activities. And so my advice is always set goals that you know you cannot meet, but that motivate you to keep moving in the right direction.
Wow. All right, so I trust that the youth setting the goals that take you further beyond, and extra time always comes up with golden goals that change the game altogether. So we're talking yesterday about the level playing field in terms of social media, the media space. What would you account has been your single most impactful opportunity that gave you visibility and voice?
In terms of impact, there's nothing quite like CNN, because we're living in a fragmented world. We're living in a world where more and more there is a kind of local conversation. It's very difficult to have a global conversation. There are very few platforms that go around the world. And so one of the rare platforms that still is, CNN likes to say it is in 200 countries around the world. I always point out there are only 192 countries in the world, so I don't quite know how they get to 200, but the claim is that they get to 200 countries. In any event, they get to more countries than any other platform in the world. And I take the responsibility of having a voice on CNN very seriously, because it is an opportunity to change the world for good, to educate the world for good. And I think that any of us who have that kind of opportunity should not treat it simply as something for ourselves, to build my own fame or something, but treat it as an opportunity to educate, to get a message out. And if you do it that way, then the platform also becomes more visible, more viable, more valuable. But it is really true at this point, we don't have enough global platforms. We don't have enough of a global conversation. So people in America are very unaware of what is happening in Africa. I think nowadays there's more awareness of what is going on in America because of Mr. Trump. But that will one day go, and so we do need these common platforms.
All right, thank you very much. And for a final question on perfect transition, like you said it, let me bring this home. You celebrated our football, you talked about our extraordinary energy, and you wondered what happened when we do that. I have a question for you. Nigerian jollof rice, have you tried it?
I have not tried it, and so I still haven't. That's my goal.
All right, that's his goal. And like we all say, he's going to score a golden goal, because I charge you, I dare you, which jollof rice is better? Thank you, Farid.
All right, I think we are ready. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready for the next panel. I would ask that you all settle down. Can the photographers move away so that we can get started? We will begin with the Vice President of Nigeria, and I request His Excellency to come up.
Okay. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Macky Sall, President of Senegal, Your Excellency Paul Kagame, President of Rwanda, Your Excellency Felix Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Right Honorable Dr. Ruhakana Rugunda, Prime Minister of the Republic of Uganda, Your Excellency the First Lady of Mali, Mrs. Keita Aminata Maïga, First Lady of the Republic of Guinea, Mrs. Konde Jenny Kaba, President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, all of our state governors present, members of the National Assembly, the founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation and Chairman Heirs Foundation, Mr. Tony Elumelu, and his dear wife, Mrs. Awele Elumelu, Your Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, the head of the Civil Service of the Federation, captains of industry, all of our young men and women of the Tony Elumelu Entrepreneurship Forum 2019, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. No matter how young or old we might be, our lives are essentially stories that are being written and revised every day. And those stories range from what is to what could be, from the reality we're born into to the realities and the ambitions and dreams that we create, that we desire, and those that we strive to achieve. As I prepared for this event, I encountered a few of the very many stories of businesses and lives transformed by the Tony Elumelu Foundation and its various initiatives. We have Mavis Onduchwa, who trained for the hospitality industry and went on to a career as a TV presenter, and is today a successful farmer with the goal of feeding her native Botswana. A decade ago, a Nigerian, Zion Oshiobugie, looked ahead at life as a domestic servant for a family member in Lagos. Today, he is a proud CEO of a consulting company based in that same city where he started out as a domestic servant. There is Mohamed Daoufi of Morocco. He's the founder of a 3D printing company that produces affordable artificial limbs. Every day, he makes it happen for someone. Every day, he gives life to someone who had thought that all life was lost when they lost their limb. In Cameroon, there is Michel Nkodija. He actually tells and retells stories for a living through his Nokima Game Studios, which develops video games that are based on traditional African myths and legends. His goal is to change the way Africa is perceived globally and to give young Africans a reason to be proud of their cultural identities. Across the continent, in Uganda, Joel Cherop is a farmer pushing the boundaries of agriculture, using irrigation technologies through the Atari River Integrated Irrigation Initiative Limited. Every day, he makes a difference in farming in his country. Again, from the DRC is Lino Alain Munionu, who used seed capital to start an agricultural farm. And Jose Kimalo, who founded Wapimed, a health tech company, providing quality healthcare across communities in the DRC. Benin Republic is Vital Sunovo, promoting trade across Africa with his fintech startup that's called Exportunity, a virtual market that is now directly supported by a leading African banking institution, the UBA. In the age of the African Continental Free Trade Area, there is perhaps no bigger or better opportunity to be exploring right now. And then there are the hundreds who are here. These stories are just a few of the thousands told and experienced by entrepreneurs whose lives have been touched and transformed by the Tony Elumelu Entrepreneurship Program, TEP. And even all of those thousands of inspirational TEP stories are themselves just a representation, just a fraction of what is out there across the continent. A landscape that is emboldened by multitudes of young people who are refusing to wallow in self-pity or frustration, who have realized that the conquering of the challenges of their environments are the milestones for outstanding success. Young men and women who have come to fully understand the transformational power of technology in the 21st century. Here in this room, there's a great representation of what the private sector can accomplish. It's also hugely inspiring to us as governments. And I'm glad that a number of African governments are represented here. We're challenged to create the enabling environment for all of these young entrepreneurs to thrive. Our continent continues to be defined by the unsavory and unwholesome stories, which do not often accurately represent the reality of life and opportunity. The people in this room are the perfect, long-awaited counterpoints to those one-dimensional narratives of Africa that have sadly gained ground over the years. Outside on the streets of every village, town, and city in Africa, there are many more individual embodiments of the potentials of this great continent. But we can change some of the false and some of the true but unfortunate narratives of Africa. We must find young entrepreneurs and provide opportunities for capacity building. Our school curriculums must emphasize not just science, technology, engineering, and maths, which we're doing now, but critical thinking and entrepreneurship. And the promise of entrepreneurship banks, the promises that we've made about establishing entrepreneurship banks must be kept. By birthing this intervention, by birthing this particular intervention, Tony has compelled us to focus on what really matters, our youth and their dreams. And the message to Africa's emerging business giants is a clear one. How and what can you contribute to empowering the next generation, helping them to realize their own dreams? And you who are gathered here in this room, helping you write, rewrite, and revise the next chapter of your continent-changing stories. But permit me a word to you young entrepreneurs as I take my seat. I want to say to you that you live in the best of times, and always be suspicious of those who remind us all the time of the good old days. They are probably suffering from a bit of memory loss. Farid Zakaria, our moderator today, made a fascinating statement to the 2012 graduating Harvard class, where he made the commencement speech. He said that the smartphones that the young men and women in that room that day had in their hands had more power than all of the computing power in the Apollo aircraft that landed the first men on the moon. Today, as we waited out here, I reminded him of that statement, and his reply was, yes, that was 2012. Today, the smartphones that the young men and women here today have has 100 times more power than all of the computing power of the Apollo aircraft that landed men on the moon. So today is the most advanced moment in human history. And your generation is the smartest that has ever lived. We're holding our breaths for the incredible achievements that you will make. God bless Africa. Thank you.
All right, we will just get this podium off the stage, and then we will be ready to have our heads of state, heads of government panel. I think just give us a minute or two to get this podium moved away so that you can see more clearly. The wonderful staff here is very worried that they get the protocol correct and the hierarchy correct, and I'm telling them that they shouldn't worry, that they're among friends. So I'm asking the presidents and prime ministers to allow for some flexibility here. I think we are almost ready, and I would ask Their Excellencies, the heads of state, heads of government, to please come up and join me here on the podium. Thank you so much.
Where are you?
Henry Kissinger once said that those who need no introductions usually crave them the most. But I am going to follow the principle that the people here are too famous and too well known for me to need to do any introductions. We are simply going to begin because we have a limited amount of time with these very distinguished people, and we are going to launch right into our conversation. They have very graciously agreed to simply answer questions. First, we will have a conversation amongst ourselves, and then they are going to be asked questions by entrepreneurs from the Tony Elumelu Foundation. We are going to try to match one entrepreneur from each country to ask a question of his or her president, and we are trying to make sure that we have, in that category at least, some gender balance. So there will be an equal number of questions asked by women as by men. I look forward to the day when the panel also is equal numbers of female presidents and male presidents. Let me begin with Paul Kagame. So you must get tired of answering this question, President Kagame, because the question is always a variation of the same one, which is, how the hell did you do it? Rwanda is now, in terms of the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, 29 out of 190. That is 10 points higher than Japan. So I think that the real question people would have is, what were the most difficult challenges in creating the kind of environment that allows the private sector to flourish? What are the obstacles and how did you overcome them?
Thank you, Farid. I will try to say it in a few words. First, we tried to do it because there were no alternatives for us. We had to do it because looking back in time for our country, we sank so low that there was no lower point to go. The only way to go was up, and up we tried to go. So the first thing we had to deal with was the mindset of our people, because there is a history where people were used to sitting back and things being offered to them for free from abroad or for whatever, things done for everyone. So we had to find ways of making sure that Rwandans understand that they have to be there for themselves. And that goes for other Africans, I'm sure. We have to do our part. Even if we get assistance, we use it to make sure that we strengthen ourselves, our base, and then build on that. So, and at the same time, we had to look for ways of doing things differently from what people were used to. And in actual fact, it was not there for just politics. We got used to politics of, saying the right things and doing very little about that. So we, therefore, in the change of mindset, our people are made to say, one, development is something we must do. Prosperity is something we must achieve. So how do we get there? We have to create that vision of how we move forward. It starts with the people, ourselves, and we say, Rwandans, it starts with us. How much have we done? How much have we invested in ourselves for skills, for knowledge? And how much time do we take to do things that we must do and not wait for anybody else to come and do it? Then, doing business that Farid, you mentioned, was identified immediately as if you have knowledge, if you have invested in skills, if you are investing in infrastructure, what do you do with that? What follows is really business. It's doing business. It's entrepreneurship. It's people's creativity and innovation that has to be put into play. At the same time, that would not happen unless and until you invest in a conducive, good governance environment that will allow what needs to happen to take place. So that's how we tried to do it. And we were under pressure because of where we are coming from. And we had to convince ourselves that, one, we can do it, two, that there is no other alternative, and everybody rallied and we started doing our bit, and that's how we have made good progress.
Let me ask you, I once asked Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, what he thought his most important legacy was going to be. And he said, well, my greatest accomplishments are that I was able to bring a nation together. Singapore, you remember, is a small island made up of Malays and Chinese and Indians. So first was to make a nation, then was to create an economic model, but the final one, he said, was to create political institutions that would outlast him. And so my question to you is, will you be able to achieve that third legacy of Lee Kuan Yew?
There is no question about it, because if you've done everything else that you are supposed to do, and the remaining problem is you, it's much easier to deal with that. So if we do everything else right and we've set the stage, I don't see how one person, me, becomes the problem. In any case, even if you became the problem or wanted to become the problem, you are soon reminded that everyone has only such a time to live, and one way or the other. So I don't think that's going to be, and therefore the legacy for me is not me. The legacy is that you leave behind indeed. So if we have managed, say, to change a mindsets of our people, to know what they stand for, what they need to do, what they have in themselves, and we have united our country. In fact, it is a similar problem because our country was torn apart by divisive politics. We have now brought the country back together and also set the country on the path to development, which we are achieving. So if this is going and It's going because of the people, because of the institutions, because of the policies we have tried to put in place. We are educating our people, we are investing in their health. And these people, the Rwandans, working together with the knowledge, with the skills, with aspirations they have for themselves, I think that is the main legacy, and for me it will be just a personal story, and it will be passing like other things pass.
Let me ask President Macky Sall of Senegal, because Senegal has itself been doing quite well. It's been growing 6%. Investors are excited about it. What did it take for you to make the reforms, and how difficult is it again? What are the obstacles? Because it seems as though if it was so easy, everyone would have done it. And so, you know, when you start on this road, what do you think are the challenges?
Thank you very much, Farid. So I will ask everybody to switch in French to let me express, first of all, my deep salutation to President Buhari. Et je voudrais demander au vice-président de transmettre d'abord mes amitiés au président de la République fédérale du Nigeria, président Buhari, mais aussi saluer les collègues chefs d'État ici présents, mon frère et ami le président Paul Kagame, président du Rwanda, frère Félix Tshisekedi,
my brother Félix Tshisekedi from Congo Democratic Republic, and also my friend, the Prime Minister from Uganda, as well as the Vice President of Nigeria. It's with so much of pleasure that I had to respond to the invitation of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. It's quite unusual that the heads of states are found together on a panel like this by the initiative of the private sector. This shows that Africa is on the move, and it is a move which is irreversible. It's a movement that actually will take Africa to the next level. Because we have all come to understand that the development of our continent will not only be handled at the public sector level, but rather it should be a partnership between the public and private sectors. I would therefore like to salute Mr. Tony Elumelu for this initiative and his generosity towards the youth of Africa, our continent. We know it's our continent is the youth continent, and I can take for instance the case of Senegal. 70% of our population is below 30 years of age. 30 years of age. That is to say that the challenge of youth employment, employment through good employment, actually is one of the biggest challenges that we must actually take care of. It's one of the reasons we had to move from Senegal to this place to support this foundation. For Senegal, for me to respond to Farid's question, we are conscious of the fact that to develop a country, we should be ambitious in our willingness to transform our economy of the economy of our country. This transformation has to go through the improvement of our productive capacity. We've already mentioned this, and that is why I would like to salute the ambition of President Adesina of ADB, that in Africa we must feed ourselves. So we must therefore have the capacity to feed ourselves. To develop also, we actually have to look at agricultural entrepreneurship in the direction of the user, because if agriculture is more, then we have a large number of our youths who can actually undertake agriculture in order to prosper and make Africa great. That is Also, this can also be replicated in the service sectors. Everything is service oriented. If we have this kind of consciousness, then the states will actually concentrate itself on the basic services and allow the private sector and national, African and international to actually affect other sectors. And we know that the African private sector is taking its place in the development of Africa. That is why I think that one of our brothers here in the private sector actually has done so much so that we know that the private sector is the future of Africa. The perception, risk perception is generally exaggerated. Africa is not so at risk than Southern Europe or other parts of the world. Africans can pay their debts. We all know that there are no more risk in our capitals than what happens somewhere else. Therefore, the exaggerated perception of the risk in Africa makes investments in Africa to be funded more expensively and also preventing development. And that is what is also hindering employment in Africa. There is one part which is a public sector that, as President Kagame has just mentioned, but for us, we are actually making everything possible to manage the public sector as our mission is in order to make sure that we fight against corruption in putting in place reforms which also gives the kind of enabling environment that is needed so that Africa will not be that kind of a risk environment for people to come and invest. That is what the public sector is actually doing. We are doing that in Senegal. I'm sure it happens in other African countries. We have the agencies that are fighting against corruption in our countries. And also we have agencies for creation of employment and also so many reforms of the second generations which have been put in place since 2009 so that businesses can actually prosper and take advantage of the kind of enabling environment that we are putting in place so that corruption can be fought and people can come and invest in Senegal or in Africa, and this will be something that everybody will be desirable to do. The very last point that was raised is the human resources aspect. Africa, like we know, has a very youthful population, and it is a strength. If we actually train this youth population, we should give them the means in terms of a good training in entrepreneurship, and that is why this forum is coming at the opportune time. We are actually receiving the foundation very, very well in Senegal, and have actually put in place an agency that actually in favor of youths and women. This agency will be collaborating with the foundation to actually work closely so that we'll put $100 million into this partnership so that the proper actions can be taken. To conclude, therefore, African future is something that is based on our human resources, and we'll do everything to train our youths and especially to train them in entrepreneurship. That is where we'll be able to handle issues of employment and development. Thank you very much for giving me attention.
Let me turn to the President of the DRC. President Sall said that we should be ambitious and that the perceived risk of doing business in Africa is high and is a misperception, and that we need to counter this misperception. There still is the perception, and I would argue the reality, of corruption in Africa, in African governments. And I want to be honest about it, which is that when people talk about Africa in the West, President Sall is right, there is no longer a sense of political risk, meaning instability, meaning wars and civil wars and things like that. There is a sense of risk about political corruption. How should we think about the issue of corruption in Africa in governments?
Qu'est-ce que vous dites, ce que vous en dites à propos de cette corruption politique dans les gouvernements africains ou en Afrique?
Okay.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Pour vous.
Okay, I understood you very well. I was having a problem with my headpiece, so okay, it's okay, I understood your question perfectly well. First and foremost, I would like to thank heartily Mr. Tony Elumelu, the organizer, I'm a CEO of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. I would also like to thank all the participants to this forum. Thank my head of state brothers, and also to thank the host president, President Buhari, who unfortunately is not here with us, but I would like to extend all my fraternal greetings to him. I would like to praise this initiative, which is just like my colleagues have said, and also the organizers too, particularly Tony Elumelu himself. I would like to extend an invitation to him to come for such a similar initiative, which has been taking place in my country. It is called a forum, Matutanu Forum. It's one of our national languages. In French, it's okay, meeting point. I think in Africa, we should multiply this kind of initiatives because it's not only will not only permit us to come together, but also to make us to understand ourselves better in a positive way, and also to work together, closely together. Nigeria has two sons that it should be very proud of. I am talking about Tony Elumelu and also Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank, with whom I've had a meeting this morning. And I would like to say that I am very proud of these two sons of Nigeria, and they are contributing immensely towards a brighter future for Africa. I thank God to have brought them to Africa at this point. Okay, if I come back to the question, I would like to say that one of the scourges in Africa is corruption. Corruption has contributed enormously to the fact that Africa has not made progress. Corruption is one of the ills that has made Africa not to make progress, but rather to ruin most of its efforts. From my arrival in power, and even before my coming to power, I have been in the forefront of the fight against corruption, and I made sure that the fight against corruption, that is what I mean, is one of my objectives as president, because it is one of the dangers that actually slows down the mobilization of resources and this creation of wealth, which can be redistributed in an equitable manner or to boost the economy, and growth is actually not favored. Corruption is something we must all fight against in all its ramifications, because we are talking about small and big corruption, the bigger corruption is actually at the level of institutions, while the smaller corruption is at the level of individuals, and all of these contribute to the things that are slowing us down. Therefore, if I have to add to what you've actually mentioned, that is wars and other conflicts in all sorts, these are the things that have been slowing down the African progress. That is why my priority when I came to power was first and foremost to actually fight and ensure that there's peace and security and make it a reality in my country, because unfortunately we are actually enmeshed by conflicts due to the existence of armed groups, both domestically and internationally, that belong to certain territories that are found in certain aspects of our territories, and this has been causing a lot of desolation in our country. Therefore, we are actually fighting against this aspect, in addition that we are going to strengthen the role of administration in terms of having control of the entire territory of the country, and this will actually allow the state to establish its authority, and from that we will be able to fight all the negative aspects that have to do with corruption, impunity, and other aspects that are actually slowing down our economy. I am very conscientious that corruption is one of the ills that is eating deep into our countries, and we therefore have to put everything in place to actually, both from the public sector and private sector, in order to completely eradicate this ill that is actually slowing down our development. Thank you very much for now.
Let me ask the Prime Minister of Uganda, Mr. of Uganda. Uganda has actually had very good entrepreneurship growth. When you look at the measures compared with other African countries, Uganda does quite well. But everywhere in Africa, there is this challenge of female entrepreneurship. What are the ways in which you think it is best to try to help women become entrepreneurs? What are the obstacles, and what are some of the solutions?
Chair, before I respond to your question, let me salute the Excellencies and Tony Elomelu for this initiative, which has been able to bring together young people and mentor them, help them, support them in entrepreneurship. This is an innovative program which deserves our collective support. The second point in that direction is that because of the colonial legacy, we have tended to look at our colonial masters in terms of business, in terms of education, in terms of languages, and less on Africa. Therefore, this program, I salute it because it is going to touch on mindset change of our young people to look at Africa as their home, as their continent, and therefore this program is promoting Pan-Africanism. It will help consolidate the unity of Africa and take advantage of the free trade area that has been established by our leaders on the continent. Now, back to the question of women entrepreneurs. It is true that women in general, in Uganda and other countries in Africa, are at a disadvantage because of the cultural issues, because of ownership of property and land. The traditional banks will insist on you providing a land title or some other property which a woman normally does not have. Therefore, there is obvious need for an affirmative program to ensure that women have their rightful share in entrepreneurship and in business in general. The experience with Uganda is that although women are at a big disadvantage, when it comes to business, they have excelled and clearly surpassed men in various areas. In recognition of this, government of Uganda has established a women entrepreneurship scheme, and that scheme has further augmented the good work that women are doing. But in a nutshell, as we look at the way forward, we need to have more support for the women entrepreneurs. We need to give more support and mentorship to them so that they can compete without cultural and property ownership problems which are now working as impediments. Perhaps let me also make the last point about the high risks that the young people are supposed to be having when it comes to business and getting loans. I think one of the problems is that we may be transferring models of loans that are for the well-to-do, imposing them on the young people, and the young people find that they cannot cope. So the problem may be more with us other than being with young people. Therefore, let us be innovative, look at the young people, interact with them, and see what works for them, and support that. And I believe that the Rumel Foundation is a good example of innovatively working out a program which suits the youth and has now demonstrated success, where almost 5,000 young Africans have already benefited from the program. And the program has been so successful that it has attracted partners like our friends from Europe, African Development Bank, and many other institutions. And indeed, it has also mobilized us in government in Africa to support that program. So, in conclusion, women program, entrepreneurship is an important one. They have demonstrated capability, they have demonstrated success. All we need is to give them additional support. They will help Africa get out of poverty, which is now so rampant.
Thank you so much, Excellencies. We are now going to move to the second round of questioning, which will be done not by me, and not, alas, by those of you in the audience, so put your hands down. It will be done by entrepreneurs. My request would be that we be careful about this, just to respect the time of everybody. So if the questions can be brief, and if the answers can also be brief, we will get through one question for every leader of a country. I thought we would start with Nigeria. If we can get a question to Vice President Osinbajo. I think we have a entrepreneur lined up. Am I right? All right, I think I see someone with the mic. Yes, sir.
Your Excellencies, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the Tony Elumelu Foundation, all other protocols duly observed. My name is Chibuzo Okechukwu. I'm a Nigerian entrepreneur in the health sector with the 2019 Tony Elumelu Foundation. And I'm the founder and CEO of I Donate. It is a mobile application that leverages to bridge the gap between blood donors and patients in emergencies in hospitals using technology. Sir, My colleagues and I believe that we've developed and we have amazing ideas and businesses that will change our lives, Africa, and the entire world. I personally believe that using my idea, we can exactly and definitely change the face of healthcare services in the entire world, just with the right partnership. In order for small businesses like mine to thrive, to create jobs, create wealth, and reduce unemployment, sir, I believe infrastructure is key. Your Excellency, sir, what are you doing about power, transportation, and technology, as these are massive enablers of small businesses? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yep. Vice President.
Thank you very much. And again, congratulations on the great work you're doing with getting blood to patients as quickly as possible. Now, with respect to infrastructure, I'm sure that you realize that this constitutes for us the very biggest pillar of our economic policy. Beginning with railways, we have, as you know, started the Lagos-Kano Railway, because we very strongly believe that you must connect the country and you must connect all of the economic points of the country. So the Lagos-Kano Railway, we've completed the first phase of it all the way to Ibadan, and we're going all the way to Kano. We're also going to do the Lagos-Port Harcourt Railway. And we, as you know, we've also done the Alaja, the Warri-Alaja Railway. Now, all of these, of course, cost money, which is where we really require a good amount of private capital, good amount of private investments. But nobody really wants to invest, say, for example, in railways. So we've had to borrow, because people expect you to put your tracks and put your your rolling stock out there before they can agree to a concession or whatever. So we're doing all of that with railways. Of course, we're also doing a fair number of roads. And the strategy for roads, for the major roads, and I don't want to go into all of the detail of that, but the strategy for that is also using, in many cases, private sector. So, for example, if you look at the roads around the ports in Lagos, that's a private sector collaboration with flour mills and with the Dangote Foundation. So they get a tax credit for doing those roads. And we're using the same method in several other places where there is commercial viability for those roads. Because really, I mean, the total amount of money that federal government has, we're investing today, in the last 2 cycles, we've invested about 2.7 trillion in capital alone. That's the highest ever in the history of the country. But it just barely scratches the surface, because there are just huge, huge investments to be made in infrastructure. So let's take power. Of course, you know that power was privatized in 2005, so that generation and distribution were essentially privatized, and the government held on to transmission. But we found, by and large, that several of the discos to whom the assets of NEPA, our power company, were given or were concessioned to, many of those companies simply did not have the required resources. First, to ensure that they're able to give more distribution assets. So we needed to have more transformers, metering, and all of that. And they simply just didn't have the capacity to do so. And the government has supported and continually supported them. But today, we're rethinking all of that. And we're looking more at willing buyer, willing seller arrangements. Of course, you heard recently of the declaration that was made by the former Minister of Power, which really is our strategy going forward. And that is that we're going to encourage more private power companies who are able to render end-to-end service. We started that already in a few places. For example, in the Ariaria market in Aba, and also a Sabongari market in Kano, where there's a private power providing, a private power company providing power on a willing buyer, willing seller to the commercial actors in those markets. And it's working very well. One of the problems people always talk about is, especially private power companies, they say, hey, look, it's costing us too much to produce power. In other words, what we're getting in terms of tariffs is far too low, right? So people are asking for cost-effective tariffs. That's the power producers. But the willing buyer, willing seller arrangement allows that. So it's by negotiation. And the truth is that many of those who consume this power are really happy to pay more, so long as they're able to have regular power. So we think that this willing power, willing seller arrangement will bring in more investments into the power sector. And recently, about a few days ago, I'm sure you heard about the announcement we made about the collaboration with Siemens. So Siemens is taking over the renewal of our transmission assets and some distribution assets as well. And they'll also take over maintenance of that. So we expect that things will improve considerably. With technology, all that we think we need to do, aside from providing investments, aside from providing some investments and some capital, aside from that, what we really need to do is to take care of the regulatory space. For a lot of fintech companies, for example, a lot of mobile payment companies, a lot of them ran into trouble with the central bank because they were carrying out some types of banking activities. And so, we had to look at regulation. So we have the Entertainment and Technology Advisory Group, where very many young entrepreneurs and many commercial operators in the tech space come together with me. I chair that advisory council, and we look at the regulatory space along with the CBN and along with some of the relevant ministries to look at that regulatory space and ensure that we're able to keep it open and we're able to keep it competitive so that technology companies can have more room to operate and startups can have more room to operate. So those are some, of what we're trying to do. Thank you.
All right, we are now going to go to a lady from Rwanda to ask ask a question to President Kagame. I can't see whether that person has gotten the mic yet.
Here.
Yes. Okay. And if I can just remind everybody here, we have to be respectful of everyone's time. So brief answer, brief question, brief answer.
It's such an honor to be here. I thank Tony Elumi Foundation to have given the trust to young African entrepreneurs in raising African economy. Rwanda is a role model in terms of gender inclusion, where women are given the opportunity to be owners in terms of economic development. Me standing here is a living example. My name is Ineza. I'm an eco-feminist, and I personally thank my president to be carrying a water refillable bottle. It's such inspiring. I'm a founder of a company called Varvar, which is trying to transform household waste into organic fertilizers. My question is, what are the footprints that the government of Rwanda can share to other nations in order that we can have a common gender inclusion success story for all African countries? Thank you.
Well, I think you've more or less shared what is happening by talking about your background. But quickly, let me first once again also thank the foundation of Tony Elumelu and those who make it what it is, because it speaks to the problem and also to the solutions we are trying to find for the many problems we have on our continent. We wanted to thank you, but also join you, and that's why we have come here to encourage you and maybe through that encourage other African leaders, business leaders and others to try and do things the same way or together, more importantly, and take our continent forward. On the specific question, we, again, from the common sense perspective, we were saying in our country, 52% of our population is women. So how can we leave 52% of our population out of anything and expect to be doing anything of meaning? And that's how we made the approach to include women and prioritize integrating them in the overall activities of our economy, and not only that, also enable them to be leaders in their own right, like men and boys. So we have specifically targeted areas that have disadvantaged them and are made available resources to try and help women. One, we tried to uplift them in the area of education, in the area of their own health, which in the end, anyway, their health translates into health for everybody, because there is nobody who doesn't have a mother. So once women's health are taken care of, then you know you are taking care of the most basic thing and the foundation of everything about us. And also tried to train women and provided access to financing. We did it generally for the entrepreneurs, especially the young entrepreneurs. In fact, we created a fund which is called the Business Development Fund, and availed it to each district, and targeting young entrepreneurs and specifically looking out for women who need to be uplifted in this area as well. So that is what we have been trying to do. We just don't focus on women, which we do because of the position they are in, but we do it within the framework of trying to uplift all entrepreneurs so that we don't resolve one imbalance and create another. So that's what we have been trying to do.
What is the percentage, President Kagame, of the Rwandan parliament that is female?
Now, women are 62% in the parliament. Women, men have been complaining that, but we point to other areas where they are also dominating, so that we create that balance I was talking about. But in a government, in cabinet ministers, we have 50-50. In the judiciary, we have about 40%. Local administration, a bit lower, 35%, but always work in progress. And we are making sure that women, in fact, this is enshrined in our constitution, by the way. The constitution provides that we must make sure that there is a certain threshold of women participation we can't go below, and we make sure that we fulfill the constitutional obligations, but also not just numbers, but by really making the investments necessary to raise those numbers.
My feeling is if the men complain, it's not such a big problem. Women have been complaining for thousands of years, and nobody listened to them. So, for the president of Senegal, for Macky Sall, I think we have an entrepreneur. Again, if the mic is with that person, he can stand up. I think. Oh, it's a lady. Sorry, my mistake.
Okay. Your Excellencies, Votre Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République du Sénégal, Monsieur Macky Sall, c'est un honneur pour moi de pouvoir me présenter à vous aujourd'hui.
To be here to ask you a question
Mon nom est
directly. My name is Avantiam. I am part of a project that is has ambition to actually give a meal every day to a child. You put in place a marketplace for local products that is called Liverpool.com, and we also have a geographical information system in order to optimize this food production aspect.
Notre plateforme permet de mettre en relation les producteurs locaux et les cantines scolaires
brings together the schools and the local producers in order to remove the aspect of infant malnutrition.
Aujourd'hui, Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, our platform actually makes each actor to actually manage its stock, also its comments, and also to look at the financial aspects that are actually done outside the platform. Therefore, a study that actually told us that 2027 e-commerce in Africa will bring more than $75 billion, and this will also affect more than a large number of African people. For us, is something which with the producers we work with, they actually have access to banking services. The alternative currently is, for instance, mobile financial services, which we know in Senegal, that actually helps to have direct access to such services. That is bringing together the producers who can actually have transactions in order to sell and receive products and also make these financial services through the platform. Mr. President, my question is, what can you do currently to improve access to funding, just like I've mentioned, because in Senegal, most of us entrepreneurs usually have a problem that has to do with funding in order to improve on our economy and that of Africa. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Bintou Thiam. I think that's your name. Okay, I would like to start by congratulating you, knowing that young entrepreneurs like you, particularly young women entrepreneurs, you actually raised an issue that is an issue of access to funding, which is also the aspect of banking services in our economic. We already have in our ICT service, we've tried to digitalize, that is making people to have a choice and have a positive discrimination through the rapid delegation of entrepreneurship. Annually, we actually try to find out how much is involved. That is, we are talking about $6 million a year, which is exclusively reserved for this category of young entrepreneurs. Yes, you may have other mechanisms too that are, for instance, Islamic microfinance for young women, which actually offers different kinds of services to the woman, who that actually allows them to get funding and in order to handle issues that they have as young women entrepreneurs, etc. In one word, fintech, we must know, has actually developed to the advantage. As you know, as a public sector, we know that the digital economy, just like we said, should be sustained, and we will actually have an annual digital forum through which we will be able to identify all the skills and all the startups, and the government itself will actually support such startups in order to bring services to our people. I've already asked for the development of a monitoring system for those who are sick from inaccessible places right up to the hospital, in order to be able to trace the trajectory of the patient so that issues of health can be appropriately handled. This will be made available through your initiatives. We as public sector, we create the environment, we actually facilitate funding, and the rest actually depends on your ambition and your willingness to succeed. There is no doubt that you generally succeed, and as young Africans, you definitely succeed given the initiative of this foundation and other initiatives. To conclude, once we have this program, a Senegalese program on entrepreneurship, we already have this since 2015. This program has been training at the master's level on entrepreneurship and has put in place 354 entrepreneurs that are actually giving out jobs to others. And we've also supported this particular program where young girls and boys are able to get the support from the public sector in order to actually blossom in their different initiatives. Thank you very much.
We have a question for President Tshisekedi from the DRC. If that entrepreneur could stand up, yes.
Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président Tshisekedi, je m'appelle Anna Hope Kaburo. Je suis cofondatrice de TMDCHA, qui est une application mobile de covoiturage qui veut révolutionner le transport urbain en RDC et améliorer le déplacement quotidien des 80 millions des Congolais. Ma question, Monsieur le Président, porte sur l'accès au crédit bancaire des jeunes entrepreneurs congolais. Je suis moi-même issue d'une famille d'entrepreneurs
from a family of entrepreneurs, I have an experience of very expensive credit from the bank to the entrepreneur, and from statistics, the interest rate of is between 18 and 30% on an average, and this actually weighs down on the entrepreneurship and actually reduces the growth of entrepreneurs, and this is actually almost inaccessible to those of us who are young. Mr. President, my question is this, for you, from your government, since you've shown your interest, can you actually make accessible banking credit to us and in particular put in place a program of funding for startups in Congo? Thank you very much.
Très bien, mademoiselle.
Okay, thank you very much, young
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
For your question.
Ici, j'aimerais vous rassurer et dire que les problèmes de la jeunesse ne sont pas méconnus de ma part. Je fais de la jeunesse une priorité étant donné que je pense et je l'ai toujours dit, au-delà de toutes les richesses et les potentialités que contient notre pays, c'est d'abord la première d'entre elles, c'est la jeunesse. La jeunesse est une arme efficace pour le développement, mais attention, elle peut aussi être une arme destructrice pour les responsables politiques qui ne font pas, qui ne s'occupent pas suffisamment d'elle. Pour cela, pour répondre directement à votre question, j'ai entrepris une réflexion qui va, d'ici la fin du mois, se concrétiser carrément et qui consiste à créer un fonds de garantie qui va donc permettre d'ouvrir l'accès au crédit aux jeunes. Parce que effectivement, nous avons remarqué que, comme vous le dites, les taux d'intérêt sont exorbitants et cela est inacceptable. Par ce fonds de garantie, nous pensons pouvoir, dans un premier temps, couvrir les risques que les banques hésitent à prendre, mais aussi nous allons imposer à celles-ci de ne pas dépasser les 5% de taux d'intérêt au grand maximum. Cela, nous pensons, va booster le génie créateur de nos jeunes, et Dieu sait combien ils le sont, et permettre évidemment la croissance que nous attendons tous de cette catégorie de la population. Et cela également va empêcher, va mettre fin à cet exode que nous constatons, cette fuite de nos cerveaux et de nos capacités, parce que nos jeunes ne se sentent plus à l'aise dans leur propre pays, ils n'ont plus de débouchés, mais nous pensons qu'avec ce fonds de garantie, nous allons réussir à leur permettre d'entreprendre courageusement et d'être couverts par la suite. Nous allons également renforcer les possibilités de nos jeunes avoir accès à l'éducation et à la formation. Parce que cela aussi est peut-être la cause du comportement déplorable de nos banques. Elles ont peut-être l'impression d'avoir affaire à de jeunes entrepreneurs qui ne sont pas qualifiés. Or, en renforçant justement ces capacités de nos jeunes, nous pensons pouvoir leur donner l'occasion de faire face à ces défis qui se présentent. Voilà en quelques mots ce que je peux dire de l'encouragement ou des mesures d'encouragement que nous pensons apporter pour renforcer les jeunes dans leur esprit d'entreprise. Merci.
Thank you so much. It's interesting to me to notice how many of the questions have been about access to credit or capital or technology. The final question to the Prime Minister of Uganda, Prime Minister Rwanda. Yes, ma'am.
Your Excellencies here present today, my Prime Minister, Right Honorable Dr. Ruhakana Rugunda, Jebale Kosebo. My name is Akwero Emma, an entrepreneur from Uganda. I'm very excited and honored to be here today as one of the recipients of 2019 Tony Elumelu Entrepreneurship Program. I'm the co-founder and owner of Mytal app, a research app that enables all business owners to get feedback from their customers in real time, feedback that they can then use to improve the quality of products and services that they provide. They will do this by rewarding or paying their customers for the time they take to respond to these surveys. Now, our goal is to target customers across Africa to download this app, respond to surveys, and just trade. Now, there are barriers to businesses such as mine, barriers such as high taxes. Business owners are required to pay taxes even before they make profits, exchange rates, movement like across countries. You can't move or market your goods easily. You're delayed because of issues such as visas. My question today is, what trade policies can Africa adopt to attain economic liberation?
Well, I think that's an important question concerning new businesses. There are policies in many African countries of giving support to investors, and this is often in reference to big investors from the countries of foreign investment. I think where we need to pay attention to is African governments being more sensitive to new businesses, new startups, so that they can have tax breaks, so that they can be able to build and then be able to pay taxes later on. So we'll take it up as government and address the challenge that you are facing as startups and new small businesses.
Thank you so much, all of you, Excellencies. I think we are at the close of this session, and all that is left for me is to ask Mrs. Elumelu to say thank you, to propose a vote of thanks, and then we will officially close this panel.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we end this session, it brings us to almost the close of the 2019 Tony Elumelu Foundation Forum. This has been a two-day session, which I believe has been very productive, and I'm sure we all had a lot to learn. But first, let me start by thanking immensely our excellencies here. The President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, represented here by His Excellency Professor Osinbajo, the President of Rwanda, President Kagame, President Macky Sall, President Tshisekedi, Prime Minister Rumugunda, our First Ladies, the First Lady, Madame Condé, of Guinea, First Lady Madame Mega of Mali, and all other excellencies here. Also, I need to thank, and I must thank, the DG of the World Health Organization, the Vice President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Dr. Adeshino, Professor Orama, Dr. Weta, and all the members of the panel which we just concluded before this session. In addition, I must thank as well all our state governors present here, all ambassadors, all other excellencies, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I cannot leave here without thanking all the staff and members of the foundation, all the staff and members of the group which have supported immensely the United Bank for Africa and all other groups. And of course, our entrepreneurs, the reason why we are here. You have been amazing. You have brought so much power to this session. You have shown so much interest, so much hope in the continent. From your participation, from your questions, we know that indeed you are ready for Africa. You are ready to see the development of our continent. And so I thank you. Entrepreneurship is indeed the future of Africa. And over the last 2 days, we have seen sessions, we have heard comments, we have heard commitments from private sector, from the governments, from individuals. We've received commitments, and I know that as we leave here ready to implement those commitments. And indeed, if we do this, we know that indeed Africa will be a place where we will all be proud of. I hope we've all had some learnings from these 2 days, as indeed I have. And I want to say, just before I leave to the entrepreneurs, that as I said as I started, I say again as I finish, that indeed the world awaits you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Dr. Elumelu, please, we're going to have to respectfully ask that as the First Lady of TEF, you remain on stage, not standing alone. We respectfully ask for the founder to please come join you. We are about to do a first picture for the purpose of the proper closure and media representation of this. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, sirs, a moment, please. May I first have, okay, together. And then I need... Please, I need first and foremost the founder, his wife, His Excellency the President, Federal Republic of Nigeria, represented by the Vice President, Professor Osinbajo. Thank you. A picture says 1,000, not just words, the power of the personal story. We heard it from founder, Tony Elumelu Foundation. Poverty anywhere is a threat to everyone, everywhere. Being innovative and bring your plans and ideas to a place of scalable, feasible applications. We respectfully ask for His Excellency, the Vice President, to please remain because we have the next picture. The next picture, please. Thank you. We would like now to, please could every entrepreneur rise up. We need to take the pictures of the President of Nigeria along with the founder, his wife, and select entrepreneurs from the different represented countries here. The first group, Nigeria. The second, Rwanda. The third, Senegal. The fourth, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the fifth, Uganda. Once again, this photo op is exclusive only to select Nigerian entrepreneurs. Select Nigerian entrepreneurs. Well, I know right now we are repurposing the dynamics of this, but the first pictures you need to see. Please respectfully, gentlemen of the press, and I need the intervention of the coordinating producer of the photographic, the serial presentations. Thank you. Thank you. Select Nigerian entrepreneurs from Nigeria with His Excellency, the Vice President.
This is Channels Television. You've been watching a live coverage of the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Forum coming from Abuja. We've come to the end of the live coverage. Please stay tuned as we return to our normal programming.